Yes.
You're reminding me of, I was watching, was it a seminar? I'm not even sure, but they were discussing a book by, I think, Uvuse Gumedena, or he was just one of the respondents. Anyway,
Right.
Dr. Steve Lambert, one of my favorite historians, who's like
All right.
contemporaries in terms of age. She was, the discussion was around the role of the public intellectual, and she wanted to expand that definition of a public intellectual, drawing on the book. You will know, the author, the book about Umanyano, and how, or Mama, the role that they played in the communities through that. And then again, from like a rural perspective, I remember just an anecdote that my mother would say, that there was this organization that was started by President Thabo Mbeki's mother, who was around Aidutwa, and the organization was called Zenzele, and they would have these fairs where the woman would show, as you had indicated, the women would come and showcase like their cattle, their sheep, goats. So my mother would say, that was like the bane of her existence, because she was responsible for making sure that the ducks were clean, and she'd have to take them and make sure that their feathers are all nice and white, and she'd put Vaseline on their feet. And then she'd say, once you're done that, and then the duck would just run into like a puddle of mud.
Oh no!
But just that there was a self-sufficiency, and women of that time. I mean, when my mom was a teen, that was like in the 60s. So women of that time took pride in what they were able to do, and would encourage each other, because I think in the fair sort of platform is sort of the same as Umgalelo, in that it appreciates and acknowledges the work that people do. I think it was also a form of bartering. So if your sheep and then someone else's goats, I'm not sure the mechanics of it all, but just a reflection of, and as you say as well, there was some writing that I came across that said anywhere between 80 to 90% of the men at any given time would be gone, either to the mines, and so the women really were shouldering the responsibility of keeping the society and the community intact. So I liked the glimpses of that in your book, even when you're looking at the different characters, whether it is Whawha, whether it is your mom, whether it is your biological mother, the fact that you had women who had agency enough to make certain decisions about their lives as well, and live there with the consequences of those decisions. So linking back to what you had said earlier about part 2, the reluctant Unathi,
the reluctant one.
The reluctant one. I have a theory, and I was not trying to shrink you, but bring it. But I have a theory, and I remember even when you were like putting the final touches of the book, you had asked me to read through it a bit, and there's a part where I said, I'm hearing this voice, but I'm not quite hearing this voice. There's a bit of a tension here. So I have a theory, especially about there's a part of the book, without giving too much away, you have got to get the book. Whawha was here. Memoir by Unathi Kapa on her website, unathik.co.za. or you can order directly from her on Gmail. Whawha was here at gmail.com.
Yes.
You have to get the book because even our conversation up to now, it's been triggered by the book and
the book.
and the
Yes.
things that come out of the book. So this is my theory. No? You can correct me if I'm wrong, or you can just sit with it for a little bit, because I don't think I even have said it to you, even in our own private conversation. So people are hearing this for the first time. Unathi will be hearing this for the first time as well.
All right. I hope I don't jump off my chair.
So this is my theory. You said you want to be surprised with everyone.
Yes.
Yes. This is my theory. So Unathi has to move to a new environment. She has to grapple with herself, who she is within this new environment.
Right.
And then Unathi makes a decision that, yeah, I'm not playing this game. I'm not participating.
Not about this life.
I'm not participating.
Yes.
And for me, as I was thinking about it, I thought, it presented for you an opportunity to opt out of an existence that you didn't want. And it approximated some of the challenges that you were grappling with. But it presented a way to sort of put a resolution to it and say, okay, I'm out of here, peace, I'm leaving.
Yes, yes.
And I just felt from my side that it helped you put sort of like a stamp of ownership on your life and the choices that you're making in your life, so that even though there are these other destabilizing things, it gives you an opportunity to say, no, not here. I
not here.
So that's what I thought about. Okay, I think it was because I've asked you years back, but so like, okay, what was really going on? and as I think about it, I thought, no, it's probably. And the only thing, I'm sorry to make this analogy, it's just the only analogy that I can come up to at the moment.
All right.
How people practice cutting. So they're in pain somewhere, but they want to let the pain out. So they cut themselves to let the pain out. So for me, that whole experience seemed to be sort of like a cutting for you in terms of where there's been destabilization maybe in your life, whether it's whispers from elsewhere. It was a way for you to exert some control, I guess.
I see. Life.
So what are your thoughts on your amateur psychoanalysis?
I need to run it via my therapist. No. Oh my goodness, that's so profound, V, because I never would have thought about it that way. But now that you've gone there, it has brought me back to the issue of agency. I think it's the first time that in my life I made the kind of a decision that said, this is my life, and I'm actually going to make a resounding decision about it. And we'll see what the consequences will be. But right now, I'm going to express myself so clearly. And I ultimately think that's what it was. And to perhaps also be in agreement with you or in alignment with you in the sense that it was that. Let me not even, add anything else to it, V. It was that and more. And I think it came at a point where, now that I think about it, this is my matric year, and one would be like, this is not the time, and and to think that that version of myself who had always been so timid and so the only way in which I expressed myself boldly at that time was through music. But in terms of my words and my choices, I really was not making any bold moves in my life at that stage. I was just a child, who was going to school, in boarding school specifically, and a lot of things were happening at the time. But I think this was the deciding moment. I hear this a lot from your motivational speakers and the rest, who will say there will be so many, the decisive moments in your life and such. I think that was the very first one that I made, that I created rather, that it was a moment that I created for myself, whether consciously so or not, is really immaterial, because ultimately I made the choice. And it brought me to a place that I think I needed to be in at that stage. So yeah. Let's psychoanalyze, shall we?
No,
it's important.
Just,
V, it's so, I'm so sorry, V.
No,
I just wanted, all right. No, I just wanted to say it's so important as well, because it also takes us to the psychology of a teenager, which is so important. I think a lot of times children feel that they are unheard, or even if they were to say something, it would be, they would be just hush, just do what we're telling you to do here. We know what's best. We are the grown-ups. We're going to make the decision. And I think for that, the kind of teenager that I was, to make that kind of decision, not to say it was the best, not to say we condone it, but we were simply observing and doing a post-analysis, which tells us that perhaps this is what this child was trying to arrive at ultimately. And it's important that we refer, to that context in the conversation that we are having, because I think the psychological processing that we need to go through, it becomes cathartic if we dig deep into what made you do that. Not just you did that, but what actually drove you to that point. And it opens up other conversations within this conversation as well. So, yeah.
And, even from our previous discussions, even years back, that particular event, I've always come back to think, oh, what was happening there? So as I was reading it in the book, especially when you say, I'm like, my goodness,
yes,
what is happening?
Yes.
What is happening there? And just you're relating all of this to teens. I'm officially a mother of 2 teenage daughters now.
Yes.
and we had a visit from a friend who was with her teenage niece. But I could pick up from them. I saw the niece maybe 2 or 3 years back.
All right.
In the before times.
Yes.
This whole
all
thing.
This.
And she was like, this kid, and now she's like, So I asked her, what is happening with this family?
Yes.
And she was like, oh, I don't know how they are. And I was just thinking that sometimes we say that term, carelessly, oh, that's just how they are. They'll get over it, or whatever it is that they're going through.
Yes.
And sometimes we don't make that space to say, what are you going through actually?
What are you going through? Yes. Yes.
I remember my mother saying, even with my one daughter, just tell her to write it down. Like when it comes to her, tell her to write it down and then share with you. Yes. Happening. But what you just said just links to something that I had just made a note of here, that it would be great to have like a multi-generational discussion about these things, people from our generation, a teenager, and people from like my mother's generation, like a red table talk of sorts, to unpack all of these things, and what they mean, for us, just as individuals, how we relate to each other,
Yes.
I don't know if you saw, we've recently inaugurated ourselves onto TikTok, no, not so.
Yes,
and
we
that is such a
have.
beautiful space. I love it because it's a digital record. You know how I feel about having a digital record. It's a digital record of people just sharing about what they feel. There was this one question, and there were very interesting answers where this lady says, what is the one thing you think the older generation of Black parents need to hear, but they're not ready to hear? And just to hear some of the things that people are talking about as they stitch their responses to that. So there's definitely just a reflection that people are making around who they are within the context of their families, and what kind of relationship that they would want. Of course, though, noting, hopefully, the things that we're saying we would have wanted are the things we're giving to our own kids. Like they won't be saying the same thing now.
That's right. That's right.
In a few years. So, yeah, it's very important. Like you said, you wanted the book to create conversation. So I'm on my third last issue that I wanted to pick with you, just looking time as well.
All right.
So if they figure out time travel, that's my question. If they figure out time travel, and you had an opportunity to visit a younger Unathi, whichever, part A, part 1, part 2, which younger Unathi would you visit, and what would you say to her?
Oh, wow.
Knowing what you know now.
Which one would I visit? Knowing what I know now. I would visit the one that we've just touched on, we've just psychoanalyzed. That's the version, because I think that girl needs to know that it's going to be okay. She needs to hear it the most, because the younger one sort of still believes that she's in the care of, her parents, and she's gonna be all right, she's being cared for. But the middle Unathi is not sure whether she's coming or going. She looks all right. This is the Unathi who dresses up, because TLC is now her favorite, American girl group. She dresses the part. She sings along to these songs. You think everything's fine. This is the one that I would like to visit and say, what you are portraying on the outside, you can feel on the inside. This is actually who you are. It's just that it has not aligned to a point yet where you can say your inward existence is what you are expressing on the outside. You want so badly for your outside to be a reflection of your inside, but there's just a mismatch for now. But hang in there, because it's all going to come together eventually. But she needs it the most. She needs that reassurance the most. She needs the visit the most. And yes, I would go and chill with that one. And I would also tell her that your peers actually think you're cool. They actually they don't tell you this just yet, but you will soon find out that they really think you're all that. But you are in a phase. Just hang in there. It's going to pass. And yeah, I think she would need to know that.
And I think just as a reflection of something that you've said previously, where sometimes, because we are in our own internal world, we may not appreciate who we are being for other people or to other people, because we in our own maybe internal turmoil about things, and sometimes even experiences are tempered by our own restlessness, I guess.
Oh, yes.
Inside, and it's only after the fact that we can appreciate other people's experiences
right.
of us, which is sometimes something that we've talked about, and I think it just touches on the earlier question around communities of care that we build. As you know, periodically I'll drop you like a WhatsApp to say, I love you. You know?
Yes.
That's how important it is to voice out and tell the people that are around us that matter and mean something to us, what it is that they mean to us, and how it
right.
is that they matter in our lives. So the next issue that I just want to touch on, which is quite big in the book, it's actually I'll say even a character on its own, and that is the issue of spirituality.
Yes.
So one of my favorites, she doesn't like to call herself a theologian. She likes to call herself a biblical scholar. The Reverend Dr. Will Gaffney. And she's done a lot of work in terms of reclaiming the feminine expression of God in the sacred text.
Yes.
She points out that from not even just from Genesis to Malachi, but right throughout the scriptures,
yes.
Whenever the Spirit of God or the Spirit or the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, whenever that is mentioned in the original language, be it Hebrew or be it Greek, that expression is always either feminine or neutral. So neither.
Right.
And I've heard, again, Ebony Janice was in conversation with her friend, Uthia Monnier, talking about how if people would have an experience of God as mother, it would revolutionize their connection with the divine. So I just wanted to have a reflection from you in terms of how you believe people's familial experiences can either facilitate or hinder their connection with God, or hinder their reckoning with their own spirituality. So like, just what are your thoughts on that, and in how maybe the God as a father figure only in many people's imagination,
yes,
and not like the full expression of God's self, but how people's family origins can have an impact on their own faith and practice, or their spirituality, or the divine. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Right. Oh, what are my thoughts on that? Okay, I have to first make reference to my own spirituality and how family has informed that. Because I grew up in a home, where every evening there would be, family time, where we would have these prayer sessions, and sicula maculo from church, and all sorts of interaction that is centered around our Christian faith, at the time. And then there was a transition that happened in my father's life, because now I suppose, announced to my mother that there was a different spiritual call on his life, because now he needed to train as igqirha, which is a seer, a spiritual seer, and they used to be called witch doctors. I don't know why they were called that, but it's a seer, basically somebody who sees the things of the spirit, so to speak. And when that came about in our family, it shifted everything, because our parents' spirituality guided our own spirituality as a family. So if your family is Christian, you are Christian. Your father is now training to become a seer, you are now also going to go along those lines. So my parents stopped going to church, and my older siblings followed suit. And I was this girl who was still going to church. You know, I'm this little one who was like, I am taking my hymn book and I'm off, you know, to the Moravian church, which was also in our village. And my parents actually encouraged this. And for me, it was a matter of, you know, you have raised me to believe that there is a God that I must worship on a Sunday. So I'm going there. And they would still give me, you know, the money for collection at church, you know, to contribute. And I did that consistently, you know, from even when I was attending boarding school. When I would come back from boarding school, initially I would still go to the Moravian church, and my family is on this other journey. So I think the sense of agency, once again, comes through strongly, even at this stage, because I think I've always been this girl who wanted to determine her own path. Regardless of what the story of my family is. And at that time, it might not have been as clearly defined as agency, but certainly there was something in me that said, you must make your own choice. And now to come to how does our familial existence in terms of spirituality affect our own spiritual journey? I'm making reference to this because this is the story, I believe, of many families and many, you know, people within families, where if you choose a different path to what has been established, sometimes it poses challenges, because it's like saying, Singamamo River Tinap. What is this thing you're telling us now that you have become, for example, this born again, whatever person, or you are now practicing, you are now into, you know, Judaism, or whatever the story may be for you. And families are, you know, become totally polarized in some cases. And in others, people become ostracized, because if you are this black sheep here, you know, we are on this path, you're choosing this thing of yours, then go, you know, just don't be a part of this family. We are sokolis. And that's why it becomes challenging. And I think spirituality should always be an individual choice. I think it's sad that we tend to think that we can collectively decide for all and sundry what they should believe or what they should worship. I believe that our maker, because I believe there is one, will ultimately be the one doing the roll call and everything else at the end of the day. I make choices for my own self that I can answer for at the end of the day. And everybody else can choose their own path, but I just take care of Unathi. What is Unathi doing with her life right now, so that when she needs to account for her choices, she does not say, my mother made me do it, or, you know, God, the situation in my family was such that, you know, it presented these challenges. No, that's not gonna fly. That's not gonna fly. So I think it really is something that as a society we need to look closely and deeply into why it is that we are so fixated on making choices, even in the spiritual context, for others. How do you drag somebody to a religion or a set of beliefs that they don't want to come to, and you think you are doing right? If we are going to come to Christianity, for example, I don't read anywhere that Jesus ever dragged anyone by the scruff to say, you absolutely will believe in me as the Son of God. You will do it because I said so. but yet as humans, we have the audacity to act as the deity when it comes to these issues. And I think we're really playing with fire in that regard, because the minute you want to assume a role that has not been assigned to you, you are taking on a task that you will one day have to account for, because you too will have to account of how you made it your responsibility to pick up Unathi, put her over your shoulder, and you know, dump her on the altar to say you will accept, you know. And it's really sad. And I think especially when we do it to children, it's traumatizing. I will tell you of a situation where somebody that I used to date once said to me, because I met this person and I liked him, he liked me, and then I converted to become a born-again Christian and all of that stuff, and I was this on fire person, you know, with the gospel, and had to, you know, ask him to step aside. And in later years, when I reconnected with him and we were just talking about the faith and everything, and he said to me, do you know that I grew up in a family where my father forced me to go to church? He said, my father used to be a devout Christian who wanted to paint this picture that his family was perfect, his children were perfect. So this one time I actually showed up in church drunk, totally drunk, just, just to protest, just to show that I do not, yes, just to show that I do not want to be part of any of this. And I'm sharing this because it becomes important for parents to realize that you are not doing anyone any favors, or your children any favors, by forcing them down a path that they do not of their own accord, you know, choose for themselves. So I suppose ultimately what I would advocate is that in the context of a family, people must be left alone to pursue their own path in terms of spirituality, and also to trust that this God that we claim, you know, can speak to us all, can reach us all wherever we are. Trust him that he actually can, that maybe you don't need to go to such great lengths trying to coerce people. There's nothing wrong with you know, sharing your faith, I believe, and just being, you know, yourself in terms of your own journey. But where it becomes a problem is where people, you know, are so imposing, and I think that is what I am deeply opposed to, because I think it defeats the whole purpose of God wanting us to reach out to him in our personal capacity, because then it's coercion. It's coercion, and I don't think we should be doing that. And also, I think family can exist beautifully where there is room for dissent, not dissent in the sense of you know, animosity, or a sense of animosity, but to just create a culture of learning from each other's differences, and allowing that environment to be a reflection of what our children should expect in the world, that our children can be confident in that even if they are in disagreement with us, they are not going to be shut down as a result, that you know, conversations are encouraged, even in the context of faith. Even when a child says, but how do we know? When my daughter asks me, but how do we know? You know, you say we've never seen God. How do we know he really does exist? You know, we must be open to such conversations and not be like, because I say so. That's insufficient, and encourage our children to wonder and to explore and to go to this deity to ask for themselves, go and inquire, to encourage our children to inquire. Yeah, I ultimately think that's how it should be, V.
I like how you tie it with truly living out the faith, that there is an author and a finisher of people's faith, and it's not us. It's not,
yes.
it's not the parents.
Yes.
The other dynamic that I wanted to just bring into the conversation around this is how, I mean, I've heard it said that people's relationship, say with their earthly fathers, does impact on their relationship with their heavenly Father. Spoken of from a perspective, if there is any say lack of proximity, maybe not safety with earthly fathers, that translates to how people relate to God, in that if there's an aloofness maybe with the earthly father, the people might find themselves being able to worship God,
right,
but not relate, not relate to God.
Yes.
And I think beyond, because I mean, we come from a culture that is Christian, and the Christian notion of God as a father, and how that plays sort of into the binary of the father mother, so that then God is like a father figure, but God is not like a mother figure, you know. As I had mentioned earlier, what Unathi was saying, no Ebony Janice, was how people could get away with a lot with their fathers because they're like sort of distant or not as involved, and they can sort of like play whatever card that they would want to play with their father, and that translates to how they reckon with God or with their own spirituality. But how mothers make people account, what did you do with what we discussed before you come tell me about any other things. I think that's what they were saying. So just the how sometimes just our family experiences do impact on that relationship, and how in the book there's a part where, as you are exploring your own spiritual faith and practice, if I can call it that, there's a sense that that relationship is transcendent or transcends what we normally understand about family, etc., and how there's a strong sense of you listening to and responding to your own intuition about how you relate with God. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that. Very complex.
Complex. Very complex. It is a complex subject, and I think bearing in mind that there are nuances, you know, in terms of the father-child relationship, even where you would say, I have a present father, and somebody else would also say, I have a present father, but the way in which you experience each other's fathers would be completely, you know, different. And taking that into account, and when now going to the context of relating to this deity who's your heavenly father, and whether you take your earthly father to be some kind of a reflection on that father who is unseen, who is, you know, God Almighty. And this is something that I also grappled with a bit in the beginning of my, you know, conscious faith walk with God, because I didn't know how to imagine him. I wanted to imagine God. Is he like my father? Is he stoic? Is he funny? Is he? I certainly didn't imagine him to be funny initially, but then I thought along the way, okay, now if we are made in the image of this God, so maybe because we have sense of humor as humans, he must really be, I mean, he's the source of the thing. He put the humor in us. So and for me, it had to be a conscious conscious deliberation on, does this father in heaven in any way have the same characteristics as my father on earth. Bear in mind, I now have become aware that I have my father who has raised me, and then there is my biological father with whom I don't really have a relationship. So the relationship that I'm having with God in heaven, to me, was, this is how I resolved it for myself. He is the ultimate. I am seeking whatever it is that he has to offer as a model for what a father should be. So I'm not in any way comparing him to my earthly father, or my absent or distant rather father who is my natural father. So for me, I had to separate the two, because even in the context of motherhood, if my daughter were to compare me to the Holy Spirit, I would fall short dismally. So I don't want that comparison imposed on me as a mother. And I certainly am not going to approach God, on the premise that he probably, that there's some resemblance in, well, maybe there is resemblance, but not that there is a direct, relationship between these two relationships. I hope that makes sense, V, because yes, I do think that we ought to look at our earthly fatherly relationship and take some elements from that to give us an idea, some inkling on how we ought to relate to God. Otherwise, why do we have an earthly father relationship, or why do we hope for that to, to be manifested in our earthly existence? But I think God is the ultimate example of what that ought to look like. So I can understand the struggle for somebody who maybe does not have any relationship with their father down here, or maybe the relationship is strained, or it's just completely, if I may say, dysfunctional, to now be expected to have a healthy relationship with a God you have never seen, but whom you are somehow, asked to believe is the ultimate father for you. What is that if you've never had that modeled? Yes.
Yeah, very, very complex thing that
yes.
I think we all get to just grapple with, especially when we think in terms of practical application of the things that we say we hold dear, that we say we believe in. And this just links to my next issue that I just would like to hear your thoughts on, and it's something that we've talked about I think many a times in our private conversations, and I think as with the issue around the feminism of rural African women, it's more about a balance of stories. So my next issue is around, we have a world famous philosophy, African philosophy that we pride ourselves on as Africans. I've seen sometimes, people from other countries or other Africans in the diaspora talk about it with such fondness that sometimes when you then go right down to the smallest unit of a community and the culture, which is that family, sometimes it's not as apparent as we I don't want to say posture it to be, but anyway, posture, that's the word that's coming to me. And this is the whole concept of Ubuntu,
right?
How you came about to know some things about your birth and the nature of your family was whispers, I would say, from the village grapevine, if I could.
Yes.
If I can call it that.
Yes.
And there was this, I've never watched an episode of it on TV, but I've seen snippets on TikTok. This paternity court, sort of like a Judge Judy meets a DNA testing. It's very, very weird. But anyway, people go on there, and I just remember this one. There was this guy who actually strikes a resounding, if I can call it, resemblance to his father. But then it turns out it's not his father. But then how he relates it is that people from the extended family started saying to him, you know, so-and-so is actually not your father, you know. And I think this also just ties back to what we talked about earlier about a love ethic being the base on which you interact with people. So if you could just have a reflection on how sometimes the philosophy of Ubuntu may not actually be as expressive, especially when we talk about as expressed, when we talk about the different configurations of family, and people may be inserting themselves into businesses that they may not have any reason to actually be inserting themselves on that. And I think it's something that I also touch on the forward, that your story also touches on. I just want to get to the place. I said the memoir Whawha was here bears testimony to the collision of worlds with one life being the arena, the urban, the rural, Western sensibilities, African spirituality, and the force of extended families brought to bear upon the intimacies of a household. So just your thoughts on that, on how we have erred as African people, and how we can do better going forward in terms of actually living out this world famous philosophy of Ubuntu.
Oh, that world famous philosophy. Gosh. And it's a beautiful philosophy. And if we juxtapose it against the practical or lived experience of the philosophy itself, sometimes we fall short in the implementation. And yes, it's an ideal that we are all aspiring to, but we're told that it used to be a lived reality, you know, for those who came before us, our forefathers and foremothers. And I think for me recently, I've found myself in a place where I had to question deeply some of our philosophies and how committed we really are to carrying them out in our lives. And Ubuntu, which I think sometimes we throw around, you know, so casually that we don't think about how do we actually implement this thing. And I think we apply it so generously to guests or strangers in our midst. We are so welcoming. We say, oh, African people of Ubuntu, people who are so generous and so embracing, you know, of each other and others, you know, beyond their own community. And then we've been told stories of how, you know, even passers-by in our villages would be welcomed in, you know, in days gone by. Just to come and have a meal, or to be told you must have been walking, you know, such a long distance, at least come and have, you know, some water. And then if there's any animal that would have been slaughtered, they're given meat, they're given room to, you know, to lodge overnight, and then they can continue on their journey. And it's that spirit that people are, you know, constantly yearning for, or lamenting that we have lost as the African people. And I've been wondering to myself, how do you, how can we make sure that this philosophy becomes, you know, our day-to-day practice? Because as you know already from my story, V, there are elements of rejection and elements of just this child being reminded of who she is not in the context of a family that she has always regarded as her family. And there's no sign of Ubuntu in this context for this particular child who has been raised by, these parents that have raised her with love and with Ubuntu, with dollops of care. And I think it poses the question whether we are more comfortable with, dishing out Ubuntu to strangers because it's something we can manage or we can do in short installments. That at least if we have to accommodate someone for a night or two, we can live with that. There was a time when, in our villages, children would be asked, to make space so that the guest or the passerby or the stranger would have a place to sleep. And the children would have to, understand. But I'm thinking in the long term, is this something that we really consider as an integral part of a day-to-day existence and conduct to those amongst us as families? Do we practice Ubuntu in the context of our families to each other? Is it something that we are deeply committed to, as a resident ingredient in our familial makeup? Ubuntu to you as my sibling, to you as my aunt, as my nephew, as my niece. How do we practice that in a way that clearly demonstrates that we really are people of Ubuntu? If my sister's if my sister passes on and she leaves behind 3 children, do I take them in, without hesitation? And am I able to mete out to them the kind of love that is as close as possible, if not exactly resembling that which their mother would give them? Or is it such an uphill climb that would much rather that just, let's just send them off to boarding school or something, just so that we don't have to do that hands-on daily work. And where I've experienced Ubuntu in my personal life with my parents, that for me is the script for how do you raise a child or children who are not your own in such a way that they even forget or are totally brainwashed, as others would, would like to label it, into believing that they are in fact your child, because that's the kind of love and tender care that you give this child. And can we spread this across the board? Somebody that I once had this conversation with said to me, Unathi, it was different back in the day because we had land that our grandfathers, used to plow. It was an agrarian kind of existence. So you had plenty of food. You had, this livestock. They had flocks and flocks of livestock that it was easy to take care of large families at that time. And therefore, they didn't have to think twice about taking on relatives or their children, where you had this huge household. But they said now it's a different time because, economically, it's not feasible for some people. So they see it as a burden rather than a blessing to have the responsibility of taking care of family, which I suppose is one of the things we need to think about and contemplate when it comes to our carrying out Ubuntu. But I just think to myself, just ukukathala, in isiXhosa, just a spirit of not hospitality, but genuine care and hands-on practical demonstration of commitment to love. Saying, we don't have enough in this household, but I'm going to band all of us together with as much love as possible. I often hear people who will say, we didn't have a lot while growing up at home, but we knew we were loved. And this is not in the context of extended family, but just family units where children truly felt that love was the main ingredient that sustained them in their livelihood. When they would come across children who had more and came from bigger homes where, you know, there were more resources. But I really think we ought to contend with this issue of Ubuntu in the context of family, not Ubuntu in the broader community, not this worldwide philosophy now that it has become, but really in that nuclear to extended family unit where how do you treat Unathi if she is a child born outside of wedlock and her mother, you know, is not immediately available to care for her? How do you treat her in the presence of the mother and in the absence of the mother? And I think it can be done, even in this context with the socioeconomic challenges that we are grappling with. I think if the spirit is right, then we will come up with solutions. I think it has to come with the foundation of we have the resolve, we want to do it. There's agency because we want our families to work. We don't want this strain. You know, at this time of the year, because we touched on this earlier, where people are going to be with their families and such, it saddens me how you'll often hear on social media around this time, people will be saying, oh, it's that time of the year again where we have to go and pretend to be getting along. You know, it's so sad to me as African people that we have become such a people. Of course, I'm a baby, you know, as a 40-year-old, I don't know what was happening when Ubuntu was really the lived thing. But from what I imagine, I'm like, you know, it must have been really glorious. I had a glimpse of it while my great-grandparents were alive, because this is where we spent our holidays with my, you know, my cousins. There would be my aunts who are not so much older than me, because I'm this child who was born, you know, to a teenager, so to speak, a young woman. So a lot of my aunts are not too far from me, you know, in terms of age and such. But we lived in this home where, in that homestead, you were greeted with, like, as you entered the yard, there was something about the spirit in that home that you knew that this is our home. Our grandparents were there as the glue that held us together. And I think perhaps it also starts with the adults to demonstrate it to us. Show us, what is this Ubuntu thing supposed to look like? Pull us together as children, where we're trying to pull in all sorts of direction, and like, I have my life in Cape Town, so-and-so has their life in Joburg, but create environments where we have to be conscious that indeed this Ubuntu thing can be lived. It can be a lived experience, you know, on a day-to-day basis. Yes.
I think the nuance that you also like to bring, I saw, I think it was a tweet where someone said, listen, if maybe going to be with the extended family does something to your mental health, you are free to be where you
not go. Yes.
you are free to be where you'll be. Yes. At peace. And I'm just thinking, as you were discussing and as you were just reflecting on this, on how, and I think perhaps it links back to what we had said earlier around, like, those communities of care.
Yes.
That we are able to build around people that we meet as we journey on in life.
Right.
Would then begin to mean so much, so much to us. So much that we've talked about today has touched on various things. We've touched on family, yes, spirituality, how we can have love as the overriding ethic with which we move in the world. Yes. Also linking to Ubuntu as well, talking about our different selves, and even showing that care to the younger versions of us. I mean, you talked about how you would want to to visit part 2 Unathi, and for people viewing or listening in, part 2 Unathi you will find in the book Whawha Was Here, the memoir by Unathi Kapa, so that you can just have just a richer understanding of this conversation. I just want to say so grateful that I've been like I know an author, like up close and personal, that you have, Unathi, I'll say bed your soul in the service of a better world. And I know that may seem, but that's what that's what you've done, and that's what was your conscious intention with this book, to offer a tool, Mantyi, a tool to help facilitate some conversations around identity, belonging, family, love, and the nature of love, how we consciously relate with the people that are in our lives. So there's been like a flurry of activity, Mantyi, around the book. You launched the book in October. I think the first virtual tour where like you were in conversation with someone about the book was, I think, early November sometime, if I'm not mistaken, late October, early November. And then there's been many, well, this is the 4th stop, if I'm, it's the 4th stop. So I'll ask you what you say other people have asked you. What's next?
Oh gosh, what other people have asked me and now you're asking me. Oh yes. What's next? What's next, V? I want this book to lead the way. I of course am looking forward to more conversations on this tour, because this is the virtual book tour of Whawha, and there will be more stops in the in the next couple of weeks and into the new year 2022, and there will be in this format, virtual, one-on-one conversations, but we also want to open this up to more participants in this virtual space, because due to the current conditions, of the COVID-19, virus, we can't be yet in physical gatherings in that way that we would like to be engaging each other. But fortunately, the digital space affords us, the ability to do this. So for now, we are doing the virtual tour. And we are also looking forward to just people giving me more feedback on reading the book, because there's a word that keeps coming up when people express, how they feel about this book. And at first it concerned me. And then I decided to welcome it when people would say, I felt triggered after reading this book. And they meant it. And because it has reminded them of their own personal journeys within their own family contexts, and has forced them, to look into their own existences, but also to have conversations, not only with myself, but I imagine with those in their own, own circles as well, beyond this space. So I appreciate that so much, and I'm looking forward to just engaging with readers. That's what I'd really like to do ultimately, engage more with readers. I've had reflections from, our country and also from the United States, from those who have read the book and their candid reflections on it. There's somebody who actually said, I cannot relate to the culture, but this book reminds me about my own sense of belonging in the bigger human family. So he said it's not an alienating book, rather it forces all of us as humanity to grapple with who we are in the context of family. So I've really appreciated that kind of feedback. And yes, the virtual tour continues. In other words, V, to answer your question in terms of what's next. I'm not going to talk about other books or other writings because now it's all about Whawha. She wants to take the center stage. So we're gonna leave it at that for now. But anybody who wants to know, when are the next, conversations taking place, I have a website, which is the home of Whawha, I call it. It's unathi.co.za. You go there, you'll be able to find more information in terms of where to find the book. And V has, informed us generously on the different virtual platforms where you'd be able to find and access information about the book. So it's Facebook and Instagram, it's the website, TikTok as well. And you'll be able to meet me there and be able to engage with me as well, just as a human being, beyond just as an author, but as Unathi Kapa, a human being, journeying with us all as we figure this thing called life out and loving while we're at it.
Well, this has been, how nervous I was about this.
Yes, you made it.
But actually, I made it, yes. And not only that, I'm actually, even as we're like sort of wrapping up now, I'm thinking of many questions. I'm like, oh, maybe there are part two.
Yes.
Just to pick up on some of the things and just to reflect on some issues as well. I just want to thank you again for writing the book. Thank you for giving us this tool that people can use to engage themselves.
Yes.
I believe self-reflection is very important, and to just also have open conversations. I think going forward, this book is going to mean so much. Just when you look at the issues that our country is dealing with. I mean, the latest stats put it at 70% of all children born in South Africa are born to single parents. So some of the things that this book deals with, whether you're talking blended families or whatever family configurations that are not the norm, but when you talk of 70%, even the norm is sort of changing now in terms of what society looks like. So as we talked about the transcendence of the written word, I can see your book well beyond the next 50 years being something that is referenced by people as they talk about just the complexities of family sometimes, and the complexities of identity, and just the complexities of dealing with just the different facets of life. South Africa has a very, it has the history that it has.
Yes.
the melting pot of what we have, and some of the decisions that have been made previously that have caused some rifts in how families are formed, particularly for African people in the country. So this is one book that I know will stand the test of time in terms of how it can help just facilitate that just reckoning and conversations about our lives as we make sense of our lives. So thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for the time today. And we will talk later about a possible part two, but I really enjoyed this, and I like that the conversation extended beyond what is on page 85.
Right.
That the book actually unearthed. I was one of those triggered people, but maybe for part two we'll talk about the areas of
yes, the triggering areas. Yes.
Because as we know, I think it was James Baldwin who said, you know, you read a book, you think you're experiencing some things. I am butchering this quote of his, but the main point was that in reading a book, then you see a mirror. You
right.
see, oh, I'm not alone, actually. There are other people
right.
who experience these things. And I think this extends to platforms like these conversations as well, where people will say, oh, okay, there are people who are having this life experience that is similar to mine.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
It's been great, and I had fun. I can say that. Thank you so much.
Yes to fun. Thank you very much, V. Yes to fun, and I do want to end off on this note of fun, because the ultimate destination for all this, I would like for it to be fun and joy, because nobody wants to stew in you know, in misery or in trauma. We want to process the trauma so that ultimately we arrive at a point where we can breathe and say, oh, dealt with all of that, let's go have some fun, you know. And it's important that we do that even throughout the journey. So that's very important to me, that we don't sit with the heaviness too long, but take as much time as we need to process. We don't want to rush through anything. So thank you, V. Thank you for the fun. Thank you for everything else beyond this conversation. And I appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.